and see if this works. Now we say goodbye to the chickens. But so it's something like, another touch I like. You can tell I did this all on the fly. As an outsider, Grant and I live in Berkeley now, but even in Berkeley, you think of Marin as a real green place. So I did like that the solar panels were so pervasive. But down at Lytton, is it Lytton Square? Okay, that's how it's pronounced. I mean, I was really struck that I was kind of standing outside of the bookstore. And so here's the building on one corner. Nice little bit of Tudor. And then here's the other corner. Nice little bit of Mission Revival. And then here's the other corner, which is, who knows what it is. But it's entertaining. And then, you kind of look down, more Tudor, but then next to the Tudor is like kind of a neoclassical, almost colonial classical bank building. I didn't do justice to the marble columns. And then beyond that is something that is truly unique. I mean, it's one of these things where when I first saw it, I thought, oh my gosh. And like an hour later, I was thinking, well, what a great, you don't see those everywhere. So I mean, in other words, the point I'm trying to make is just, I really like the fact, that this, whatever the political, cultural factors are, the idea that this mix took place from the start. Clearly there was a strain of kind of Englishness with the Tudor things, which, growing up in Contra Costa, we weren't that sophisticated. But my wife's from Palo Alto, so I see a lot of that thing. So it's interesting that you have all these different strands, and there was a comfort level then, but apparently a comfort level now, that as long as it kind of fits into the same basic height, the same basic meet the street, the same basic rhythm of the building, so on and so forth, that's what's important. And I think that that's terrific, and I know that the starting point for this series is to get people thinking about the general plan and all. And I just think the more that survives, the better, because that is something that I think that, to the extent you folks stress good architectural details and good architectural materials and kind of let the styles work themselves out, I think that strengthens the ongoing character. But then there's another thing that I noticed. And what I noticed also is there's a lot of asphalt in town. And I'll start with Depot Square, which my vague memories of getting to Mill Valley every now and then since I was a college student, that's the center, you're right there, so on and so forth. You just really feel you're in the middle of everything. But if you actually kind of sit and look at it, and I don't mean standing outside the bookstore, but if you go to Depot Square itself and just sit.
Depot Square?
Plaza. Oh, Plaza, I'm sorry. See that? I told him outside the Plaza. It's not really a square, the triangle. But if you just sit there and look around, what you start to see is wide roads and parking and more parking and then a one-story strip shopping center and then more parking. And there's a lot of asphalt. And it's actually, this kind of gets into the picture we carry, is that my image of Depot Plaza, and probably a lot of people in this room, and certainly a lot of Mill Valley residents, is this kind of neat, brick and the buildings and all. And you actually look at it, it's just kind of spread out. And I have no idea what direction things go in, but as I, sitting there looking at it, it was the kind of thing where I just started thinking, what if tomorrow morning there were a whole bunch of more buildings there? I mean, not a zillion more, but I mean, for instance, let's see if I think this is, like here's this, the little retail store. I mean, this is classic 50s, or early 60s, whatever. But imagine if that was 2 stories, 35 feet, whatever the zoning limit is, out to the street, filling in, so on and so forth. Something like that. And then there's, again, this is just a few quick shots. So there's this. Then over here, you've got the parking that's part of the plaza. And I wouldn't touch that because you need parking that makes you think you're going to find parking on the street. It's that old trick. But then the one next to it that's like a $2 an hour private lot. I mean, imagine if this was two stories with 3 setback. Imagine if that lot had something in it. Even imagine if the block on the far side of the west side of Miller Avenue, where there's like the Wells Fargo and the empty store with the pop-up retail sign, which cracked me up because it's like, I just love it that people in San Francisco think they're so edgy when they talk about pop-up retail. And then here it is, like a real retail broker. It's now entered the retail broker parlance. But I mean, like, if that had a 3rd story, if that parking lot was filled in with a 3rd story, obviously, if these were all proposed tomorrow, there'd be a huge fight, so on and so forth. But what if they were just there? I think what you would have is you would have the Depot Plaza, but more so. It would be more contained, and it would still feel like the center of this lively cosmopolitan village, but it would actually be more of a sense of arrival when you were there, just kind of more like, and it's not like I'm proposing in the general plan you should do this, but it's the kind of thing where I can just imagine if someone said, we want to build 3 buildings in the town center. People would go, oh my gosh. But again, it's like, okay, well that's, that's not what you put on the postcard in Mill Valley. You don't even have Mount Tamalpais behind it. If something was like that tall, you'd still see all the cool trees. In other words, I think one of the problems in the Bay Area, and certainly in San Francisco, and certainly more so in Berkeley, but also in places like Mill Valley and everywhere else, except Emeryville, development becomes such a zero-sum game. If someone proposes this, there is a cadre of people who kind of paint it as the end of the world. And the sad thing is you tend to lose, and I, as someone who lives in Berkeley, you certainly see evidence of this in Berkeley and San Francisco. I have no idea about Marin. But the sad thing is where it kind of gets to the point where the only people who really stick through the development game and keep pushing till they get something built are the ones you don't want building in the first place. Because the ones who actually have some good ideas and are kind of attuned to the community, it's like, yeah, I don't want that grief. I've got a good idea and they're demonizing me, I'm going to go wherever. But you get the guy who kind of knows the right, so on and so forth. They're just, so I've been doing a little research on Mill Valley, and inevitably it's kind of painted in these apocalyptic terms, like imagine this. And in fact, it's not this. It can be a lot of little pieces. Little pieces that if they were there, you'd take them for granted, and if they, anyway. So this is the kind of thing, like I looked at this and these other pieces and sitting there, just started thinking, there are ways to build that are not, the whole smart growth, new urbanism mantra and, gee, climate change, so we need a 40-story building in Mill Valley type of thing. I mean, there are gradations of change. This is another one that I'm sure you're all aware of, but I asked Mike, he filled me on the history of the hardware store and the fire and all, but it's kind of, if this empty lot was filled in tomorrow with a building the size of the hotel, or a building the size of the hotel stepping back a floor, I don't think anyone would be the wiser except people who said, boy, this block looks a lot better than I remember, and I'm not quite sure why. And this is another shot, which I took just up the block. Mount Carmel, the salvage shop is right over there. Great jackets, but they were all too short. It was like I saw like 3 that I thought, anyway. Because I had some time to kill. I was just walking around. You know, but it's interesting with a shot like this because, I'll be honest, I turned around and my first thought was, oh, this is gorgeous, the hills, the trees. Again, I'm from Contra Costa. We just have, I mean, oak trees are great things, but you just have little oak trees and brown hills, and this is just so lush. You know, but I mean, now, look at that with a bit more of a critical eye. You know, again, what if there was a two-story building? You know, in other words, there's lots of little pieces that I'm sure the debate within a place like Mill Valley is, we have a wonderful town center. My gosh, we can't ruin it by cramming more buildings into it. But in fact, there's just lots of things there that fine-grained little pieces out of here and there add up to just a more urbane place, a more welcoming place, a place also that to some extent can stabilize the retail you like that has hung on through all the changes of the last 40 years. Because, you know, if that building had a nice new retail space on the ground floor, that would attract the fancy new tenant, rather than, well, let's shut out this other store to push in there. And I mean, it's just, there are all these little pieces that kind of come up. And, you know, so the parking just kind of kicks in. I should mention the format I wanted to do, which is just, I'm going to try and keep my talk fairly short because it's always more fun to answer questions. But it's also interesting because I've kind of done a bit of study, and obviously, a place like, you know, I talked about initially about just the trees and nature and everything, and that kind of thing you don't want to change, and it won't change. There are also areas that realistically can comfortably stay about the way they are, such as, you know, like the Blythedale approach. You know, the pure in the abstract, you know, the design charrette kind of person would be like, that shopping center, make it into a mixed-use village, and do this and do that. But I mean, you know, Blythedale clearly has its own issues. Miller Avenue, though, on the other hand, talking about the asphalt, it's just